Hi. So you're here to find out how I made $9,000 a month selling my self-published books when I got laid off during COVID. And I'm going to show you the receipts. I'm Jane Allen. I'm a best-selling author, both self-published and traditionally published. And I'm going to share my unlikely story with you of how I did it with no MFA. Okay, so here's the KDP dashboard. This is 1 month of sales. I want you to see this. This is from Amazon, and this was just making up part of that month's income. So the other part came from Ingram Spark, which is another distribution channel, and about $1,500 to $2,500 a month came from Ingram Spark. Ingram Spark was how I distributed my books to bookstores. And Amazon KDP was how I distributed my books via Amazon. Amazon makes up about 50% of book sales for traditionally published authors, and for self-published authors, it's about 90% of sales. So just so you have that in mind. And if you take $10,000 a month, that's real income, and you look at it over a year, that's salary level income. And this is from two self-published books, not a book deal, not in advance. These are books that I had written, published myself, and placed them into the stream of commerce. So I'm going to tell you exactly how I got there. I'm going to tell you why right now, in this moment, in this economy, this information matters more than it ever has. When you're in an unstable economy and you're seeing layoffs and inflation and these wild rumors and predictions of AI replacing jobs, we need this kind of knowledge and reliable information more than ever. In downturns, especially, people look to smaller luxuries like and purchases of necessity also. And books qualify for both of those. Books are relatively inexpensive enjoyment, and also they convey knowledge pretty inexpensively. And you know that knowledge is power. So it's pretty cheap to pay $20 for some power. I'm just saying it's cheaper than the electricity bill, but that's not the kind of power I'm talking about. I'm talking about the ability to actually change your life. So before I tell you who I am, more about me, I want to make sure that you know that this is for you, that this is accessible to you, that writing a book is accessible, that this information is valuable, just even to have it as background knowledge as you make decisions about how you're going to spend your time in the summer in particular. So if you can type a text message, you can write a book. If you've ever sent an email, you can write a book. If you've ever read anything, you can revise a book. You can revise a manuscript in a first draft. If you can communicate with others, you can write a book. I know it sounds overly simple, but really it's the case. It's not the content, it's the structure. If you've never believed that you could write a book, which was me, it's my job to make you believe that you can. And hopefully by the end of this video, if you were kind of at least if you were way far on the other side thinking this isn't for me, you'll at least be a little bit closer to realizing it is 100% possible. I was you. I used to think I could not, it just wasn't for me. And I don't know why we do that to ourselves. I don't know why we think that for some reason writing books in particular is just for a very specific set of people. Maybe because the industry's so mystified. I don't know. But I'm going to demystify it for you a little bit. And I'm going to make you hopefully understand by the end of this video that it is possible to do. And right now is the time to have something of your own that you control, that is in the stream of commerce, that you can take directly to the public. And you're not just selling your labor or your time or your knowledge to someone else, that you're really a direct participant in the economy. And that was a lifesaver for me. And so hopefully you understand, you're inspired by what I have to share with you in this video. So if you're worried in particular about AI replacing your job, or the job market shifting under your feet, a book has no overhead as a investment, as a side investment. And so people think about rental properties, but you've got to pay property taxes. You've got to pay upkeep for that type of property. For intellectual property, a book that you own free and clear forever, it doesn't cost you every year just to own it or to be able to put it to work for you to make money. And the other thing I want to tell you about AI is that AI makes mistakes. It just produces output, and it's completely unqualified. It's just it is what it is. There's no way of knowing, especially if you're a business, whether it meets your needs or not, if it's sufficient or appropriate or even effective. And you need a human being deciding that before it goes out into the world. So the people that companies are going to be looking for in the future are those who have established themselves as a voice and a perspective of discernment, who have built a brand around their perspective and their judgment, that they're someone that people can trust their opinion. And one of the best ways to build that brand is through a book. Okay. So let's go into who I am and why I'm telling you this story in the first place. I'm a professional author. I'm a full-time author. I've been doing this. I've been writing books for about, well, more than 10 years, but focused on it for the past 10 years. I've sold over 300,000 copies of my books. I'm currently published by two big five publishers, HarperCollins and Penguin Random House currently. I graduated educationally. I went to Harvard Law School. I used to be a lawyer. I have an engineering degree from Duke University. Go Blue Devils. I am you might not be a fan, but that's okay. For the sake of this, we're on the same page. I was an attorney for 8 years. I passed the bar in two states, California and New York. And right now, as I said, I'm a full-time author, and my writing business makes more money than my in-house attorney salary. It was a dream for me, and I'll talk about what my life used to look like and how we got to this life. But I've made almost close to $1 million in this career. This is my, I think, third career. And I'm excited about that revenue number. You think about over several years, your earnings and your salary in aggregate. I think I'm probably close to the $1 million mark for this career since I started writing professionally in 2018. And schedule wise, as a full-time author, if you're wondering what that looks like, it pretty much looks like what you imagine it looks like. My schedule is my own. I have deadlines, and I have to meet my deadlines, but how and when I do it, is my choice and my responsibility also. But yes, I go to Trader Joe's on Tuesday morning at 11:27. I don't know, when nobody's there. And so that's great. And I was dreaming of this when I used to go to my office when I had my last real substantive corporate job that required me to be at work, and I would fight through LA traffic every morning. And oh my gosh, I just hated that commute. But and I don't miss that. But I do remember sitting in my office and the window looked out on the parking lot of Ralph's grocery store in Santa Monica. And I would just look out that window and I would see the people outside and the sunshine and the palm trees. And I would just wish to be a part of that world and to be part of that day outside. I wanted freedom. And I had a friend who was an entrepreneur, and he would call me in the middle of the day to go to lunch or do different things, and I was like, "I can't. I have to be at work." And so I started writing something down in all of my spare moments. I would write in notebooks over and over again, "God, please grant me the freedom of my time and geography." I would write it over and over again. I filled notebooks with that one sentence, just wrote it over and over again. And I look at my life now and I'm living exactly the life I wrote. And I mean that literally and figuratively. And so that's really where this story starts, writing while I sat at my desk at work. Because not only was I writing, "God, please grant me my freedom of time and geography," I was also trying to write my first book. I would sit and write pages between meetings, and I would dictate sometimes in the grocery store line at checkout. And I was always testing the limits of what I could do because I didn't believe I could write a book. In fact, I went to school and studied engineering specifically so I wouldn't have to write. And so I would have to write a paper or a thesis. And then the joke was on me because when I got to law school, I had to write a thesis. And you're gonna really get a kick out of what happened with my thesis. I was supposed to write a really formal research paper. I'm gonna show you what I wrote. I mailed myself a a copy of the screenplay I wrote. And this was my first original screenplay. It was called Playback. And it was about a lawyer, a young lawyer, and that was my thesis for law school. You could see, here's the end. But I thought that that screenplay was gonna do so much because I don't know, I went to LA, that was one of my dreams. I thought, "Oh, maybe I won't be a lawyer, I'll go to Hollywood and someone will produce my screenplay." That did not happen. But ironically, I did wind up becoming the co-author of a book extension of a very, very famous film, which you see behind me, The Best Man Unfinished Business, which is a fantastic book and you should pick it up if you haven't already. It's extension of the story from the film series and then the Peacock series. I co-authored that book. But when I graduated from law school with this little screenplay, I actually wound up getting a meeting at Edmunds Entertainment. It was Tracy Edmunds' company. And one of the creative executives there introduced me to their junior creative executive, and you will never guess who that person was. It was Devon Franklin at the in very early stages of his career. He's a very famous producer now. But nothing happened with that screenplay. It was just these little moments of affirmation in my journey that maybe this was for me, that some things were working out and some things weren't working out. Every little step opened a new door. And so now when I fast forward into my career, the first book I wrote and really published and paid attention to was a nonfiction book. I wrote it when I was working in startups, and oftentimes with startups you kind of find yourself between jobs. And so for I think I had maybe a month between jobs, and I decided I was going to use that time and be really focused and put my perspective on paper about best practices for marketing. I had been running a marketing agency, and that book in 1 year doubled my salary with consulting and speaking fees. And it took me to Australia, it took me to Malaysia twice. It was really incredible. And it taught me what the power of putting your thoughts down into a book was and what it could do. My salary at that time, I think was 150,000, and I wound up making my business income was somewhere in the $300,000 range that year. So I just didn't think those things were possible. But then I tested it and I tried. That one summer absolutely changed my life. And you know, one thing about that book, that nonfiction book that I wrote, it wasn't my educational credentials that people cared about with that book. They cared about my experience in the industry, that I was able to take my perspective on what best practices should be based on my experience in that industry and put it on the page with clarity. My perspective based on my time in that industry of what best practices was. Everybody wants to know a new perspective on best practices in their industry. So if you're a professional or you have work experience really anywhere and you have a take, an idea, a perspective on a better way to do things, what a best practice could be, if you're able to communicate that clearly and put it on the page, that's book worthy and people would buy that book. So just keep thinking in the back of your mind, if you don't think you don't have anything to share that's special, you do. So the way that I actually started writing fiction, so the nonfiction era, I kind of rode that out and wanted to do more. I wanted to really tell a story, to really communicate my perspective. And someone told me that if you really want someone to know something, if you really, really care that they know what you have to share, then tell them a story. And so I took that to mean, oh, I should write fiction. But I really thought you needed an MFA to write fiction. So I was definitely intimidated. And what I decided to do was take a class. And I think taking a class, a writing class, is the best way to start, especially writing a book. Because let me just share this with you. There's a biological reason that it's so difficult to write a book, and it goes way deeper than you might expect. So the mere act of writing a book, a long form work, is it goes completely against our biological human nature. Our bodies are wired for survival, for efficiency and energy expenditure. And if our bodies sense that something is not going to have an immediate payoff biologically, it's not going to give us food or calories or keep us alive and get us to our next meal, then there's no dopamine hit, or immediate pleasure, or if there's no immediate hit of dopamine, our bodies are not gonna want us to do it. You're actually gonna not feel like it, and your body will work against you every time you sit down to write. So you don't get a dopamine hit for writing 1,000 or 2,000 words when you need to get to 60,000. So if you wrote 1,000 words that day or 2,000 words that day, your body doesn't care. You don't feel like doing it because it's not efficient. There's no immediate hit. I'm going to put this screenplay over here, but, but there's no immediate dopamine hit for that. So just but if you write 1,000 words a day, 2,000 words a day, just 8 paragraphs a day, that gets you a novel-length first draft in 30 days. But I want you to understand why it feels hard, because it's not that you're lazy. It's not that you're not disciplined. It's not that you don't want to do it, or that it's not for you, or that it's for other people and something's wrong with you. It's that you are fighting your own biology every time you open up that blank document to write something, and it's a long form and long-term project. So that's why structure matters more than motivation. And a writing class gives you the structure that helps you fight back to those biological urges that make you want to stop and go do something else that has a more immediate payoff. That's what's so magical about books, actually, because they are a reflection of us channeling, fighting for our higher selves, our better selves, our something that benefits others. We're doing something for ourselves and other people, and we're actually having to fight back against our lower our body biological instincts to do something higher with our higher purpose and higher selves. So I think that's maybe why books feel so magical, but it's for all of us. It's really accessible to all of us. But most people think that you just need better discipline, but it's not better discipline. You just need a better system. You don't need an MFA, a Master's of Fine Arts in Literature, to write a book. You need the right structure. You need the right community, and you need the investment of time and maybe a little bit of money to see a project through to the end. But when I signed up for that writing class, I had one belief. I just knew that if I got the right information, I would be able to build up enough confidence to try. And that class was 10 years ago. I took a few classes that did not work out, but I finally found the class for me, and it was at UCLA Extension. It was a class called Writing Strong Emotion with Rochelle Shapiro. Wonderful class. And in that class, I wrote a scene that became the acorn, one of the pivotal scenes in Black Girls Must Die Exhausted behind me. And that book, after I self-published it and after it helped me earn these revenues that we're talking about in the story, it became a Target Club pick. It was the inaugural Target Club pick. It brought me to Good Morning America. It was reviewed by the New York Times. It created all my literary fantasies come to life. It was originally self-published, and then it was picked up in traditional publishing. But I was rejected by agents to start over and over again. These were agents that repped some of the biggest names in publishing. And I just knew that they would know exactly what I was offering, or they would get me. They did not. They didn't. I'll have to show you some of these rejection letters. I mean, basically it was, sorry, not sorry, but we don't love your protagonist. Somebody told me that they didn't like the voice of my query letter, and another told me that they were very selective and this just didn't fit their needs. It was, there was lots of rejection. They just didn't feel enthusiastic, I guess. I don't know. But 300,000 copies later, it wasn't the right fit. And they weren't, I won't say they were wrong. I will say that if I had believed that their rejection had anything to do with the quality of the book that I had written, I would have been wrong. So 10 years later, I just know I'm so glad I didn't wind up with the wrong agent. I wound up with the very best agent for me who was so enthusiastic about my work that she got me a 4-book deal. Lucinda Halpern of Lucinda Literary. She got me a 4-book deal at a time when it was still relatively uncommon to see self-published books making it into the traditional sphere. Now it's very, very common. You're seeing 7-figure deals, you're seeing multiple book deals, you're seeing high 6-figure deals, you're seeing people getting traditional deals just from a post on TikTok. And I counted the deals between April and May that were self-published to traditional publishing, and there were 14 deals I was able to count in the database of deal announcements. So this is things have changed significantly since 2020 when I got my traditionally published deal. But the agent dynamics and the deal structures and the decisions that are available to you, those are all things that are really important in learning about the business. And I can't give you all the details, but I am teaching a master class about this in on the 31st of May, and I will tell you a little bit more about that later. The link is below if you want to explore it, but we're going to go back to the story and I'll come back to it. So, what I did, I self-published after all those agent rejections. Was awful. I was so upset, honestly, but I'm glad that I didn't linger. I had a strategy not to linger in the rejections. And that decision not to linger is what helped me make $9,000 a month when COVID hit. I'm so glad that I moved forward. So let me take you back to, I know we don't want to go back to that time, but just the quick details that I lost my job at the very beginning of a global pandemic. Can you imagine? Not a great time to look for a new job. But I had already decided, I'd already self-published. I had already been published for a year and a half. I published the book in September of 2018. And the reason why I was so confident in that decision of staying the course was because I had developed what I call a 12 and 6 strategy. So 12 and 6 strategy meant no more than 12 query letters, no more than 6 weeks waiting for responses. And so once we hit 12 and 6, I moved forward. And so I knew that there was no turning back from that self-publishing decision. And I was not going to let an endless agent search stop me from doubling down and getting my work to readers and building my income. So I invested my own money into the publishing of this book and the creation of the book. The total amount over 2 years until I wound up getting a traditional deal for that book was about $20,000 over 2 years. And a lot of that was reinvesting. So it was an upfront amount, but then it started to make money. And so I was able to reinvest. So the total was about $20,000, of course, along the entire length of time that that book was self-published. And part of that budget was editing, it was cover design, but the bulk of it was a publicist and advertising. So getting the book in front of readers and making sure that they heard about the book and they saw the book. And so that the bulk of what I spent was on publicity and advertising, and a lot of that again was reinvestment. So before my book deal, in total, I made somewhere between 65 and $75,000 from that self-published book, and my net profit after expenses is about 55,000. And that was over the course of 2 years, and really a lot of that was heavily packed into the last year that the book was self-published. And then came the traditional book deal, which was a 4-book deal and a very nice deal. So when COVID came and I was laid off, and this is where when we're thinking about stability in an unstable environment, an unstable economy, here's what happens when you write your book and you move forward. So when you have a manuscript, when you've written all the way through, and you can write through and have a first draft manuscript in 30 days, but then you'll have to revise it and you'll have to do editing. And so there are things that need to happen to make that book ready for the shelf. And that process is editing, and then you move into production. So let's just say there are between 3 and 5 rounds of editing. And we won't get into the details of that. That's for another day. I will be teaching about editing in August in a revisions masterclass. Especially if you're a novice author, I hired my editors. I hired a developmental editor. I hired a copy editor. I hired a line editor. I hired a proofreader just to make sure that, because I was a novice fiction author, I want to make sure that everything met a standard for readers and that I was establishing my brand. So it was a worthwhile investment. But when you move through all of those stages of editing, and then you copy editing and proofreading, and then once you get that final manuscript laid out in your interior page design, you'll get 3 files more or less. You'll get a PDF, which is the interior design of your book, your interior pages. You'll get a image file for your cover, and then you'll get an EPUB file for your ebook. So you'll upload all of those files to Amazon KDP, and then there's other platforms as well, but you just need those key files. And you'll be able to then start earning money. You'll have a product in the marketplace. But those files are your assets. That manuscript are your assets. That's intellectual property that you own. And on self-published books, you can make $4 to $7 a copy. It depends on if it's an audio book. Sometimes if you have an ebook and you're charging 99 cents, then you'll make less than that. I think it's maybe 50%, or there's a different percentage. Maybe it's 35%. It changes depending on the price of the book, what percentage you get for ebooks. But still, that's just money that you're making over and over and over again from files that you create once. And you get paid every month, and there's no advance to earn back in self-publishing, and no hold on royalties. So with traditional publishing, you get an advance, and that sounds pretty exciting until you start earning back that advance at $1 to $2 a copy. So self-publishing, I know people have the dream and think that traditional publishing is the only way, but right now there's just such an opportunity, and I hope that you're considering at least taking advantage of it. And hopefully this story is inspiring you to at least think about it. And the last piece of this puzzle, so now we talked about how we got the manuscript written. We talked about how we were able to get the manuscript into the stream of commerce and make it available for people to buy. So how do people find out about it and decide that they want to buy it? So the last puzzle piece is marketing. And let's just be honest, this is where a lot of people trip up, okay? They get tripped up at all levels. And I was successful in marketing my book when it was self-published because I took several counterintuitive steps that were kind of informed by 10 years working in marketing, which was my second career after my legal career. And my marketing career included running a digital marketing agency. That agency was the marketing agency for Lady Gaga's Born This Way album, the digital marketing agency. And that album went platinum in its first week. So I had some very interesting experiences. Another story entirely for a different video. So if you're not subscribed, subscribe, because story time is coming. This is just one story of many. But marketing itself is essentially communication. How do you get the right people to know that you made something for them? You want to write a book that just speaks to people so directly that they know it's for them, that they're recommending it to other people on your behalf. That's the highest level of marketing. That's word of mouth marketing. But it has to start somewhere. People have to have a trust. They have to want to trust you with their time and their attention. So that typically starts with reviews. And I built with my book what I call a marketing stack. So a foundation of that stack was social proof, which is reviews that makes a reader know that this is a book I want to read. And I spent the first 6 months of my book's life in the in the in the world, just giving it away, getting people asking people to review it, to read it and review it, and trying to find the right readers for that book. So I was not worried about making money the first 6 months of having that book. And that was really important because once it did start taking off and once I did start investing in advertising and then ultimately in publicity, there was already enough social proof. There was already enough reviews. There was already enough feedback and people's opinions and viewpoints and having digested the book and saying what they thought it was. There was enough of that people trusted the book and it started to do really well. And I got a lot more leverage out of the advertising that I was doing. So I would do direct outreach to social media influencers. I particularly liked Bookstagram. And I stayed on Bookstagram. I was on Instagram in the early days of Bookstagram, and I would reach out to individual bookstagrammers and I would offer to give an interview or talk about the book or want to tell them about the book. I used Instagram advertising and just doing that type of outreach is how you build trust with someone who doesn't know you and who's someone that's a complete stranger to you and your work. So it does make your money go farther with the right information and making the right kinds of decisions when it comes time to invest in spreading the word through advertising or publicity. Here's what I want you to understand about the platform I built on Instagram. Right now, my Jane Allen Instagram has over 11,000 followers. But in February of 2019, here's a screenshot. I had 206 followers. The Jane Allen account, my Jane Allen account started with 0 followers. It's been my pen name for fiction. That's just been my name since I put that book out, but it started with 0 followers. It started in September 2018. So if you see this screenshot, this is from February of 2019, 206 followers. And today there's over 11,000. But I just knew from day one, I took the screenshot because I knew there's going to come a day where I was going to share with people the journey to hopefully inspire them to take their own journey. When you know that you have a story that needs to be told and your perspective is unique and you haven't seen it yet, then that means that it's important. It should be in the world. And I just knew for me, with the rejections that I went through and the challenges that I faced, I didn't want another person who had an important perspective to share to get discouraged and not move forward and quit. So I started documenting all along the way because I knew I wasn't going to quit. I knew I wasn't going to stop. And I knew that I was going to need to share this story with you. And everything that I've told you in this story is accessible to you. You don't need a yes from anyone other than yourself. If that's a takeaway and that's a takeaway that you take from this, then I think I've done a good job telling the story. But the first and only yes you need to give yourself is to just pick an idea and get started. And one thing I'll say, I'll go much deeper in the next video. I'm getting the hang of making YouTube videos. This is my first long form video, my first story time. So hopefully it's not too bad. But I'm gonna keep doing videos. I've enjoyed this and I really love telling the story of this journey. I tell stories of these characters, but finally I'm ready to tell the story, the real story, the true story behind the stories that people have read because I feel like it's interesting, it's accessible, and it's inspirational. And in this time, this is a time where we need different perspectives and we need to share our voices more than ever for ourselves and for others. I want to say one more thing too on that note about telling a true story. I've worked with hundreds of authors at this point. I've taught, I've spoken with, I've met with, and a lot of people, the first thing they want to do is like, oh, I have such a great life story. I want to tell my life story. I completely understand that instinct, but that is one of the hardest places to start. I will go into why. Basically, it is just so difficult to cherry pick facts and map them to a story. It's so much harder to do that than to just make up a story with a really good structure and get practice being a storyteller with fiction, with characters you made up. Because once you tell your story, it's told. So if you tell your story when you're not a great storyteller, when you're a completely newbie, novice storyteller, then you've told your story when you haven't picked up the skill to be a great storyteller. And the way that you pick up the skill is just to continually tell stories. And so it's better to practice on on made up characters so that you can save your story and tell it. You're able to be a great storyteller. So if you feel like you're ready to move forward and you're ready to tell your story, then I want to let you know that I am teaching a master class that's going to go into more detail on the topics in this video. We're going to talk about more about the business of publishing, what P&L looks like, profit and loss, meaning what you're going to spend and what you're going to make. So the details I really didn't have time to cover in this video. On May 31st is going to be a live masterclass with Q&A and talking a little bit more about income and how to use self-publishing and publishing, traditional publishing, and breaking down the differences of what those experiences are and what to expect and just how to make really good decisions with your time and with your idea and how to qualify which one of your book ideas that you have is the best one to start with right now, because you might have a whole bunch of ideas that you're like, well, which one should I write? Well, I'll talk about that. That's really actually something that is a discussion point, and there's a real strategy to that. So we'll go into that in the masterclass. And then just some of the most important things that I've learned and insights if you're really ready to go forward and take this seriously. My vision is that by the end of the summer, in June, you learn how to write a book and you learn the business case for writing a book. In July, you learn the marketing, just the marketing stack, how to market in a there's 4 45-minute sessions each month, and it's one master class of 4 sessions. So in July you learn the marketing, and in August you learn about revisions and you learn about the production process and how to actually get to those files that we talked about. So my vision is that at the end of the summer I'm going to have this whole community of folks that were able to actually write and complete a book, and by the fall have something to sell, have intellectual property that they own, have an asset that is able to go out in the world for them and just demystify this process and hopefully get some new perspectives into the publishing landscape and people maybe who are ready to move off the sidelines. So if you're ready to take yourself seriously, after we tell you what idea is the best idea to write forward, then I figured out a 30-minute process to go from idea to outline. And outline is very, very important because it gives you the structure to write your story. So then you know your story is structured well. So you can just kind of write every day and just go to it, and you know what you're writing and you can be excited about it. And you know that you're writing towards an end product, an end result that's going to work. I won't call it a product because it's so far from a manuscript. Is still a creative work that you have to revise and hone, and the first draft is really like making clay. People think that the book that they see on the shelf that they read from somebody else's, that's not anybody's first draft. You've probably never seen an author's first draft. It's probably 5 to 8 different types of editors, 8 different sets of eyes on that manuscript before it it meets the shelf. So don't be intimidated by what the literature that we studied and the authors that you love and what you see as an end product. There's so many people that were involved in getting that from A to B. So I'm excited in August to talk about revisions and just show people that that what I'll show people my first drafts too, so you can see the difference between the first draft and the last draft, and you can start to build your confidence. And the other thing that I think is really important is to have a community and to have accountability. You take a class and then you're so excited and you've like really built up your enthusiasm and you're ready to go. And then you go back to your life and it kind of fizzles because you're not able to sustain the energy. So I decided that I'm going to do the master class on one day. And then for the month of June, every day is going to be a virtual immersion just with continual support and encouragement. I'm going to send a personal video every day. I've challenged myself to do that. I am personally on deadline with my own book for my HarperCollins publisher. I'm writing a romantasy novel, my first in the fantasy arena. I'm very excited about that and almost finished, but I'll be working on that manuscript and during June and during that time. So I'll be able to share with you from the field. Sometimes I just think of insights that would be helpful to a first-time author. So from exactly where I am right now. So the link is below for the masterclass. Subscribe. I have many, many more stories to share with you. Hopefully this inspired you. I have a lot to share. I'm just getting started in this channel. Hopefully you enjoyed this story and make sure you like and subscribe or leave me a comment. Tell me what you thought and turn on your notifications so you don't miss a video. And I'll see you on the page.